Okay. Okay, so expanding on that first entry there, my last project actually, when I was working at the University of Maryland, was writing the program for the renovation of the Animal Science Building. Now, I don't know what it's called now or whether it's still around, and I worked with a professor, Dr. Ingling. So I don't know if anybody remembered him, but that was a real fun project. So, I'm almost returning to my roots. So,
Wow.
and I know David wants me to talk a little bit more about the venture creations at the end. So I'll leave that there. But, we ran the incubator kind of like a business more than, a curriculum, because we really wanted to push companies out and create jobs. So I'll talk more about that later.
That sounds great. It really is kind of a wonderful. I wasn't aware, Bill, that you had worked at the University of Maryland before, so it really is kind of a nice completion of the circle in a way to find that out. And I'd just like to introduce you to everybody here at ENST. So welcome everybody to the September 30th ENST seminar. And it's my pleasure to introduce to you today a former employee of the University of Maryland, Bill Jones, who who's been involved obviously in facilities planning and management, but also has been involved in entrepreneurship and taking emerging technologies and turning them into sustainable businesses. He worked at the University of Maryland for a couple of years in the mid-'70s, and then moved to Rochester, where he is now, to work for a couple companies, including Kodak. He's founded his own technology company, which he still is the CEO of. And from 2007 to 2019, he worked at the Rochester Institute of Technology, which is currently a fairly large school of about 19,000 students, about 16,000 undergraduates. Rochester Institute of Technology is an engineering school, an art school, a design school, does everything that it can to kind of fuse those competencies simultaneously and create synergies with them. And from 2007 to 2019, Bill was associated with their Venture Creations Initiative, a high-tech business incubator. He was director for 5 years. They graduated 40 companies, 500 jobs were generated, and they raised $70 million in investment. I think it's really fabulous to have Bill here because he's been involved in engineering and science, but he's also been involved in taking engineering and science and turning it into business solutions. And therefore, he's a terribly unique presenter among the types of presenters that we have. So bring your entrepreneurship question and your technology development questions to him today. And presently, he's the Vice President of Business Development at Crystal Creek Organics. So welcome, Bill.
Thank you. Typo on
the next slide.
The FM Technologies, I closed that company down in 2002, so that's a typo.
Okay.
Yeah. So I moved on. Let's put it that way.
Okay,
but
great.
Yes. Next slide.
All right.
So I failed in retirement and basically joined this company late last year as one of the companies out of the incubator that I thought had the most promise, and I had a lot of relationships. Now, one of the things that I've specifically highlighted economical, because the nutrient management business, which when you study the competition, there was a lot of people that got into it about 5 or 6 years ago, and the average company has literally sold less than 5 units, because a lot of these came out of the wastewater treatment business, which, is one of those that really doesn't have an economic basis. You build this stuff and you charge the taxpayers. And when you're selling to farmers, it's the other extreme. So you'll hear a lot in my presentation about that. Another thing that we'll talk about more is the what I'm going to call the vocabulary. You'll hear a lot of nutrient management companies talk about removing phosphorus. Well, it doesn't go away. You know, it's there some way in some compound. We talk about soluble a lot, but there's only one company that I've even seen, and they disappeared after a quick flash, that separated the phosphorus. They had a video that showed a beaker with some material in it, claiming that they could, you know, remove that separately, but they disappeared. So everybody else is kind of working with the phosphorus in some way. So we'll talk about that. This picture you see is our dewatering system that did not work. So I'll be honest with my sharing. I know David wanted me to talk about digesters. So our initial target market, as I call it, are farms with over 500 cows, because we can support the manure output of 400 cows with one of our units. And there's about 160 of those size farms in our region, 26 of which have digesters. And the digester, the liquid coming out of the digesters is much easier and more economical to process. So that's what we're focusing on as our low-hanging fruit. So next slide, please. So until COVID hit, everybody's favorite subject was harmful algae blooms, which is off the front page, except we had over 400 in Western New York State this year alone. The current database doesn't allow historic tracking, but I was doing it in prior years, and it was clearly an increase in both quantity and toxicity. And many of our state parks in the Finger Lakes have been closed for periods of time. And this was one of the earlier blooms that took place at the south end of Cayuga Lake, near where David's daughter, or wife, I'm sorry, where David's wife graduated from at Cornell. Next slide. Oh, one last comment back to that slide. So one of the things that you'll hear me talk about, maybe, but part of my presentations, is the pending impact on property values, because we have something like 300 miles of shoreline. And I was talking to a realtor the other day, and he said the number one threat to lakefront property values in the Finger Lakes is harmful algae blooms. So I know you in the Chesapeake Bay are very familiar with the economic impact of pollution, but we're just starting to face it up here. Next. So our process is, 4 or 5 steps, I'll call it. The first thing is everybody removes large solids. Now, the interesting thing is many of the competitors, which again come out of the wastewater treatment plant, say that the first thing that we're doing in innovation is we have a screw press that creates bedding. Well, that's about 20 years old, and 2/3 of the large farms in upstate New York already have screw presses. It is important to remove those large solids, particularly if they're going back in the barn, because again, it takes time, money, and chemicals. So our process, we typically say, starts with the liquid coming out of the screw press. So in the case of digesters where we're working, that liquid is coming out of the digester, goes directly to the farmer's screw press. He or she takes the bedding back into the barn, and then we would be taking that liquid fresh from the screw press, not from a lagoon, just very easy. The farm where we're on, it dumps into a big concrete cistern, and we have a 6-inch flexible hose that's just dumped into the bottom of that. The first step is we mix ferric chloride, lowers the pH, it facilitates the coagulation later on, and that converts the soluble phosphorus, not 100%, but I say essentially all, into a non-soluble particulate type of compound. That then gets further processed, and we mix very gently, because it's part of our secret sauce, a polymer in, which coagulates and flocculates all those solids. one of our staff calls it black cottage cheese, pretty gross looking stuff. And that's what you saw in that first picture flowing into the big dumpster. And then one of the things that we have to get to, because it's needed by both our product and the competition, is to get that solid down, or that liquid down to 25% solids, approximately. If we do that, 75% of the liquids return to the farm, and as I say, essentially phosphorus-free. The term in the profession appears to be tea water, very light. That could be used by the farm in a variety of ways, all of which will probably save them money. One of the farm we're on, he runs out of water in August if it's dry, because he has, I don't know, 3 or 4 shallow wells, and you know, the water table drops. But he owns the field that drains into that shallow well kind of aquifer. And so he plans to just take this water and pump it to the top of the field and let Mother Nature take care of it. And consequently, he will have 0 spreading cost for that large amount of water. Next.
Bill, if I could interject for a second and take us to a slide here at the end that just compares the Crystal Creek technology with some competing technologies. This just so that everyone can have a little bit greater context. As far as the chemistry goes, you could probably separate the phosphorus separating technology into calcium-based versus iron-based technologies. Some of these technologies involve manipulation of pH, another does not. The calcium-based technologies, because carbonate or hydroxide is involved, is going to raise the pH. And when you raise the pH, what's going to happen to the nitrogen content of the manure is you're going to lose it. You can see that chemical equation there that we're all familiar with from Soils 200 that Dr. Weil wants everybody to really know. You have that ammonium and put it into a high pH context, and you end up volatilizing that ammonia and therefore losing the nitrogen. But if you can either lower the pH or keep the pH relatively constant, you're going to tend to, that equation or that reaction won't happen. You'll tend to retain the nitrogen. And that's what's kind of unique about Crystal Creek's technology or the Mafix technology that was developed by the USDA. And then just to compare those two technologies, Crystal Creek starts with the result of anaerobic digestion. The Mafix technology starts with just whatever comes out of a storage tank. They both use a screw press to help to dewater the material. They both use an iron chemistry, iron chloride in the case of Crystal Creek, iron sulfate in the case of the Mafix technology. And then there's some kind of coagulation or a further separation of liquid and solid that's done chemically with or by Mafix, somewhat mechanically. So let's just go back now and on to the next slide. That was just to familiarize folks with kind of some of the basic competing technologies that are out there.
There's a couple questions. Why don't you go back one slide? I noticed in the chat somebody wanted to know what we do with the black cottage cheese. Within our process, we put it through what we call a separation tank. So it floats to the top typically. And so we're removing that from the top of the tank and draining the first fraction of tea water out the bottom. So we increase the solids content to probably 10 to 12%, and then move that to what we're probably going to be using as a commercial dewatering system. We have 3 of them that we're going to be bringing into our site in the month of October. Somebody also asked about a typical farm. So the farm we're on, Spruce Haven Farm, has 1,700 milking cows, I think about 1,300 heifers. They have a large digester. The digester is 100% manure. They're not putting in any food waste, which is being done in some cases. And one of the problems we had on this farm is he uses sand for bedding, and sand really wreaks havoc on the pumps and valves. So we're going to be focusing on farms that don't use sand and just use the screw press bedding going forward. So hopefully that answers those two questions. Next slide. So just to give you a quick overview of some of our data, one of the things, and David and I talked about this, is something we can work together on. Everybody says there's a lot of variability in farm manure, which is true, but we really want to understand that better because it's critical to having our business and our products. And also, a lot of the competition makes claims, and they're not necessarily incorrect, but they're, I put them into the cherry picking category. And sometimes you'll pick a bunch of numbers that actually don't relate to each other, but make you look very good. One of the competitors in the same article was claiming phosphorus removal from 70% to 98% in the same article. Now, I want to understand that better, and also to be able to explain our numbers better. For example, test number 5 was done last fall. It was we were trying to reduce chemicals and see, balancing cost and performance. So the 0.5 pounds per 1,000 gallons of phosphorus was actually the highest of any of our tests, but it had the lowest chemical cost. We got it down as low as 0.1. So, okay, do I tell you that it's 0.1 or 0.5? That's the sort of quandary we're in. And we're just going to work through that this fall as we develop our commercial plans and, better understand this and have better ways to present it to, both professionals like yourself, farmers, and at the end, investors. So this is one of our challenges. Next. Our basic equipment, we have a full-scale unit operating. It's a little bit of a Rube Goldberg. It's not commercial, but when everything's working, it's about 40 gallons a minute. That'll handle, support a 400 cow dairy. All these numbers kind of line up coincidentally. On a single shift, we can do about 4 million gallons. And out of that, we'll produce about 4 million pounds of solid product, which is key to the business plan. So as I mentioned earlier, 75% comes out in this very, very low phosphorus, very little soluble particularly. And if we're looking strictly at, HABs mitigation, on the farm, it removes 10 tons basically per year, depending on what the phosphorus content of the liquid coming in. However, if we were going to be working in a water quality trading environment where we were getting paid for phosphorus removal, that would be discounted based on how far we were from the lake body. So it's, again, that's the sort of thing that some people will say we remove 10 tons, but what's the impact on the lake? And the answer is probably closer to 2 tons in our area. Next. So the state, New York State Energy Research and Development Authority, the acronym NYSERDA, funded this full-scale project last fall. It's about a $600,000 project, $400,000 for last year, or $350,000, and we're doing phase 2 this fall. We demonstrated it. We validated through dozens of tests our ability to convert the phosphorus. I could go on for an hour of all the things we, quote, learned, which means we went down a lot of paths that didn't work. The example of using the sand bedding digestate is a good example. We can still work with it, but it's not our first choice, and we don't have to start there. 2 things that we're focusing on this fall would be reducing our operating costs, because right now we're pretty confident we have by far the highest soluble phosphorus conversion rate of any of our competitors. But we're not trying to establish any kind of a Guinness Book of Records. We want to have a low operating cost, so we have to do a lot of sensitivity training there. And the real key to the business model is taking that solid byproduct that comes out and finding a way to sell it. So I'll talk a little bit more about that later. And our plan is to have 3 units. Our business plan is 3 units in the market early next spring. Next. So as I said, we were blessed with a large NYSERDA grant. They're pushing this on farms with digesters because in New York State, farms with digesters get basically a wholesale rate for their energy, so it's very difficult to justify. So they want to make these more economical. So we're part of that plan. And we have what I call a number of mega business plan competitions in New York State every year. And one of them is Grow New York. And that's a food and agricultural business plan competition. And we were blessed to be one of 20 finalists. There's 7 international, 5 from out of New York State, and 8 from New York State. And we'll be presenting, I think it's November 17th. The big challenge is it's all virtual this year. So, you know, the technology is going to be one of our challenges, but we're very excited about that. And that's one of my full-time jobs, is preparing that pitch deck. Next. So one of the things I've done, and you'll hear me talk about it a little later in terms of incubation, is you really need to understand your competition at a very, very, very detailed level. Well, one of the problems in this business, as I mentioned earlier, nobody's, you know, figured out the holy grail of the business model, and most of them don't remove soluble phosphorus. They'll just basically do some kind of mechanical removal, DAF systems, filtration, but the soluble phosphorus is still there. Some will claim the farmer can make a fertilizer and sell it. Well, that's a statement that only would be made by somebody who knows nothing about farming, because the farmers have a lot of things to do every day. For the last 3 weeks up in this area, they've been cutting silage. I don't want to say 7/24, but they were up before dawn and we're still cutting when the sun went down. And they have no interest in that, but it's critical. So that's a critical part of what we're bringing to the table, and we're not asking the farmer to do it. What's evolved again from this competitive analysis is that the economics come in about $1,000 a cow, and some of these competitors have capital costs as high as $5,000 a cow, and that's just not going to cut it. We know we have to get under 1,000, and as I said earlier, most have literally sold less than 5 units. The state sent me an article last week asking me if I knew about one of the competitors, which was Aqua Innovations. They sold 2 units in 2018, and they've just got $1.6 million from the federal government to build a processing plant in Dane County, which is, I think, where the University of Wisconsin is located. We're trying to find out, the county's going to operate it, so we're trying to get information on their business model, but you know, it's not probably something that would be repeatable on a normal farm. The other challenge, as I mentioned earlier, is many of these competitors, nutrient management systems, make claims that are unsubstantiated. I'll read through the data, and it would be no different than if you were reading these things, and you just come across numbers that just don't make any sense, but it's what I have to deal with. So I've spent probably 500 hours in the past 2 years doing competitive analysis. And part of it is just, where did they get that number? Does it relate to some set of circumstances? And what's our equivalent number? So it takes a lot of work to have a real solid understanding. Next. So our business model, reflecting a lot of those things that I've been talking about, we own the equipment. The farmer does not have to buy it. If they want to buy it, they can, but that's not our core business model. They provide us surplus manure, and the unit will be primarily heavily automated, but they'll turn it on and off and be checking it by, smartphone or whatever. Because if we had to have full-time operators, again, the model wouldn't work. What's been real interesting in the past 2 years, when we first started talking to these large farmers in Cayuga County, they all claimed we have no surplus manure. Absolutely. It was like the door got slammed shut. And then as they started to trust us, they said, about 1/3 of our manure, is the winter manure. We put it out on the ground before there's plants. It runs off into the lake. We get in trouble. It has minimum nutrient value. If you take it, we'd be happy to give it to you. So that's been kind of a interesting migration. And it also points out that some of this HABs and surplus manure is seasonal. Our plan, since we have great salespeople on our team, but we have no interest in selling soil amendment, which is what we're saying we're going to produce. And when I use the term soil amendment, I use it as a category rather than as a specific product. We want what we call large volume strategic partners that will co-locate on our farm, so that essentially the stuff coming out of our dewatering system would go on a conveyor and go right into their plant that might do minor processing, but primarily would bag, store, distribute, and sell. So our CEO has founded and sold 3 companies in the agricultural material fertilizer business. And the last one he sold to a very large company. And we're trying to get an agreement with them so that they would co-locate and be our partner. So we're going to produce a solid feedstock, I'll call it, but we have no interest in becoming the, I'll call it competitor for Scott's Miracle-Gro, because that's an equivalent product. And as it pointed out in my data, we're going to produce thousands of tons of this material. And that's the challenge in the business model. It takes a lot to move and sell thousands of tons. Obviously, dairy farms, I'm just amazed every day about the numbers associated with these farms. Everything is just monstrous. So that's a critical part of our business plan. We're going to find strategic partners, not try to do it ourselves. Now, the next thing is our pricing model, which we're going to be hiring nutrient management consultants that are already working for the farms to validate this. But right now, this is our goal. We know we're in the right ballpark. We just don't have the data to support this. That if we're taking 4 million gallons of manure basically out of the system, that the average farmer would be able to save 2.5 cents per gallon. Now, we see numbers all over the place in the literature, and the farmers don't want to really share this, but I was literally talking with our farm partner yesterday. If he's not going to be spreading 4 million gallons out of his 30 million, he's going to pick the most expensive field not to apply to. So if a farmer says it costs me 1 to 4 cents a gallon to spread manure, the 1 cent is probably in the fields that, in this case, he's got a drag line, so he literally pumps to that field. And of course, that is his lowest cost field. But when he puts it into a truck and drives it 10 miles, that's his most expensive field. But we have to document that. We plan to charge the farmer 2 cents a gallon, which will be our fee. And we need to get our cost, basically chemicals, down to 1.5. So in a perfect world, the farm saves a half a cent a gallon and we make a half a cent. Now, again, we have to validate this fall, but that's That's our business model, oversimplified. And the interesting thing is, if we can make that happen, that solid material that comes out of our system now is free to us. So there's no cost of goods sold, as the financial people would call it. And we can make an equivalent amount of money selling that solid product. And, we're not trying to cover our costs because it's already covered. So that, not really complicated. It's just very hard to implement. So next slide. So, in business incubation, big thing is, what's your value proposition? And it's got to be quick and simple. So on the farmer, we're going to reduce your spreading costs. Now, again, we need to get really, really good data. For Spruce Haven, we're going to have costs per field that will be validated by his nutrient management consultant. For the watershed, we're going to remove tons of soluble phosphorus per year. And what's interesting, because I've gone to many of these community meetings, most of the things that they talk about in these community meetings remove pounds. One TMDL study documented how much was getting into this one water body, it wasn't Owasco Lake, from the septic tanks. And they had, 400 or 500 septic tanks, and it was the equivalent of the output of 4 cows. So needless to say, if you're not dealing with the dairy industry, you're probably not having a real impact. Next slide. So some of the things I'd like to go over, other than the incubator, and David, we can talk about that at the start or at the finish. I'll let you choose there. What I'm seeing is an evolution to talk more about and track more the soluble phosphorus rather than total phosphorus, because the soluble is what's feeding the harmful algae blooms, and a lot of the inert, insoluble particulates just staying on the field. So we're going to be looking at that a lot more. Maybe there's some projects we can work on together. We're doing a lot of work in New York State, but I know Maryland is looking at this with the Bay very hard. One of the groups that I would encourage you to talk to is actually the Thames River Phosphorus Removal Collaborative, which is a mouthful. We went up last year. This is the watershed that stretches from London, Ontario to the west end of Lake Erie. And they're probably one of the most advanced groups I've seen. There's 28 organizations in the collaborative. 10 of them are farm groups. So where in New York State, the farmers are somewhat still hiding in their foxholes, in somewhat of a denial, and I'm not trying to be negative, but that's just the way it is. Up there, they're fully embracing that unless you deal with the farms, the problem's only going to get worse. And they have probably a dozen projects going. A lot of them are edge of field projects. And it was interesting, the criteria was it had to be immediately scalable to have an impact. They were not looking at little benchtop things, and they funded and installed these. And so they're reporting data, they've done tours. So I think they're a model. I say they're probably 2 to 3 years ahead of New York State. We talked earlier about mitigation plans, and we're located between Owasco Lake and Cayuga Lake, and coincidentally, Owasco's had probably the most phosphorus testing and studies done by Dr. John Halfman from Hobart. He's the director of the Finger Lakes Institute, I think it's called. And he has determined that Owasco Lake is suffering because it's getting approximately 2 tons extra of phosphorus a year. And this is over many years. It varies with the weather. And so I asked him very point blank, I said, Dr. Halfman, if we were going to have an impact on Owasco Lake, how much phosphorus would we have to remove and for how long? And he says you'd have to put it into a 6-ton deficit for 5 years. So I call that, a simple budget. And if you sat down, and I was actually talking with a county legislator who toured the site yesterday, I said, if you want to have an impact, you put it up there and then you figure out how to remove the tons, again, discounted for the lake. But most people in most community meetings will just talk about what I call the pounds solutions. One of the things I see coming as a solution economically is the term water quality trading, which is basically a government entity paying somebody to remove phosphorus by the pound. They're doing some of this in Wisconsin, some in Pennsylvania, but it's in its infancy. Our business plan does not count on it. What I'm predicting is that it will start to mature in 3 to 5 years. But if you were forming a business right now and said, I'm going to make money by, doing water quality trading credits, you'll probably starve. But we're going to be ready for that and have the data. Again, kind of looking at projects in Maryland, partnerships, demonstrations. If there's grants that we can go after together, we're wide open. So I'll turn it back to David.
Thank you, Bill, so much. Thank you so much. We've got a question from one of our listeners. He says, can you talk a little bit more about how the 0.5 cent savings and 0.5 cent profit fits into the economics of a large-scale dairy farm?
Okay, so
down to the farm. Are organic milk farms willing to invest more in phosphorus management and serve as a target market?
So I'll start with the economics first. As I say, I'm a big proponent of putting numbers up there so everybody understands, just like's happening here. So instead of giving some kind of generic high-level claim, and a good example here would be, we're going to charge the farmers less than what they save. Well, that's a nice statement, but you go home and you say, well, what did Bill Jones actually say? So it's part of my, I'll call it technique. So we want to validate with the farmers, and there's a lot of variability here, and I'll give you an extreme example that would be very beneficial to us. But on the farm we're on, he has 30 million gallons of manure that he spreads over a couple hundred fields. I've got his phosphorus map. His nutrient management consultant has this color-coded map, very nice. No surprise, the fields next to the barn were where his father and grandfather spread the manure before there was nutrient management, regulations. And the color code for phosphorus over 200 parts per million or whatever I think they listed as, bright purple. And everything around the barn and everything around the other barns in the area are bright purple. And the further away you get, the color changes. And of course, where he can spread his most manure, Murphy's Law, is the field that's 10 miles away because nobody spread on that in the past. So that's his most expensive, because his first ring, whatever distance it is, circle, he pumps. But once he gets past that, he has to load it into these 9,000 gallon tank trucks and take them out over the road, somewhat dangerous, capital intensive, labor intensive, fuel intensive. So we want to be able to document that cost per gallon for his most expensive fields. Now that's a standard model, but one of our farmers is going to lose 200 acres to a solar energy project, and he needs probably 300 acres, or he's got to replace that, I'm sorry, if he wants to maintain his herd. So he would have to go out and make an arrangement with other farmers, other neighbors to get another 200 acres. And when you're surrounded by other dairy farms, there isn't 200 acres nearby. So he might be at 12 or 15 miles. So if he can avoid replacing that land And land in Cuyahoga County farmland is, I think, about $8,000 per acre. So that's interesting economics, except that's unique to one farm. So we're going to try to come up with a generic cost model and then look at a lot of different ones. Now, if we charge him 2 cents, he's going to put a half a cent in his pocket. And we think he'll talk to us for half a cent. You know, he might not talk to us for break even, because somebody comes in and says, I've got a great idea every day. And they basically slam the door on those people. Our costs for chemicals and capital, we want to get under a penny and a half a gallon. So we know what our chemical costs are today. We've got to get them lower. I've been getting pricing on volume purchases, you know, kind of the basic 101 stuff. But if we can make those 3 numbers work and sell the solid byproduct, we have a business. But, you know, if you come in and say to the farmer, you know, you got to buy the equipment and it's going to cost you more to operate than it is to, that you're going to save, you know, they have no interest in talking to you. So hopefully I've answered that question.
Another thing that's come up in our chat box is notification that the Maryland Animal Waste Technology Fund request for proposals was just released today, and there's a URL there.
Oh, well,
that's very timely.
Yeah,
Thank you, Dr. Lansing, for mentioning that. We know we're supposed to finish just in 3 minutes. So Bill, the unique thing that you bring to the table is your experience in creating businesses out of technology. Can you, maybe the last thing that you can do today, and a very valuable thing, would be tell us, what do you look for when people approach you with a particular technology? And what do you look for either in the technology or in the person bringing the technology to you that makes you think that, wow, this really could become a business, a sustainable business within a few years?
Well, I'll run through it very quickly. So the secret sauce in hindsight at the incubator was we did not accept anybody and prefer not even to talk to anybody who wasn't past proof of concept. Now, we were pretty flexible with that definition, but my obnoxious answer to the person that walked in that said, I had an idea last night is, God bless, come back and see me in 12 months. Because most ideas are actually bad and fail. So we kind of let the world sort those out. So again, somebody might have this idea, but you know, we didn't have the resources at the time to work with those. The other thing that's critical is the coachability of the person or team, because we had teams that varied from, if we gave them advice, they were implementing it the next day, to people that would absolutely not listen to anything we said. And sometimes that's not always evident in the first meeting, but after a few months, we had one person that had software that could do searches, think of legal electronic documents, and look for relevancy. And we brought in 6 different, basically CEOs, and the person always had a reason why that person wasn't a good addition to the team. And that person never went anywhere. So again, coachability. Some of the things we do at the incubator, we did not have a curriculum approach. Our approach was, what's holding you up right now, and let's jump on it. So it was a very hands-on type of in your face type of things. It was not, you know, low key, very slow, because no matter what your idea or invention is, there's a dozen of them going on right now, and everybody's moving very rapidly. There's this kind of misconception that nobody else in the world has this idea, and I've got years to work on it. And in reality, your competition's already left the starting line, and you got to catch up real fast. So it's hard, you know. We had a cliche in the incubator, it's not rocket science, it's just hard. And we were dealing with all technology companies, but what was most interesting, and I'll end with this, is the most innovation was in the business model. And I'm not saying that just because of what I've just presented on Crystal Creek, but sometimes the technology is real easy. It's figuring out who to sell it to and how to price it and how to deliver it. That's difficult. A lot of tech companies believe in what I call the Field of Dreams business plan, and I've never seen one of those work. So I'll leave it at that.
So your coaching would be, if one wants to market an emerging technology, an emerging idea, would be to pay real attention to the business plan and really get oneself to a business consultant, a trusted business consultant.
Yes, and actually picking up on that, one of the first things I try to do, and sometimes I write it, because I say, I need a 5-page executive summary business plan. Now, everybody look at, it's like, oh, I got too many things that are unknown. Well, no, if you go through the standard table of contents, as I call it, a great book is The Art of the Start by Guy Kawasaki. His approach is, I've read thousands of business plans, I've funded hundreds, and this is what works. And the reason I bring it up is that you quickly find out where the weaknesses and gaps are in a business plan. So I'll sit down with somebody, just listen to them for hours, and then go off in a corner and write this draft. And it's not for publication or investors initially, but all of a sudden, you get to a section and you kind of go, there's nothing here. We better figure this out. So yes, you're right. Sometimes you can use a student or, get some resources at your incubator or a regional incubator now, because again, that's not hard. It's just, you got to sit down and do it.
Let's see, any further questions? In terms of the effluent that comes out of your process or the solid product, those things are going to be field tested. Who will do the field testing? The partners that you mentioned that you're going to be finding, or are you field testing those materials already?
We have not done any field testing. That is a weakness. And you're not the first one to ask that. Primarily, our partners will be doing the field testing, but I think we are going to reach out to Cornell because they're just like 15 miles south of us to do some, because that's really the next step. I can give you the NPK and the volatile solids content. I can compare our product with Magic Dirt, Miracle Grow, some of the other common products. We're better than all of them, but we haven't grown a thing. So you're exactly correct.
Well, Dr. Rabenhorst has written a comment in the chat box. Unfortunately, business is foreign to scientists. How do we help address this? Consultants, ? I think Bill's given us some initial thoughts and initial steps to get ourselves more familiar with the business world. And he's also given us a pearl of wisdom for graduate students, for any of us, namely the quote that it's not rocket science, it's just hard. If we take that to heart, then we can then graduate students, you can get yourselves through your program a whole lot easier. So Bill, I want to thank you for your time.
Well, thank you. This has been great. And I only wish I was down on campus doing this, because then I could go to the dairy bar afterwards. You could buy me you could pay me my fee.
It would have been my pleasure.
Thank you.
I want to thank everybody for attending, and let's all give hands there.
Thank you. Good luck.
Thank you.
Yep. Thanks very much.
Thank
Bill.
you, everybody.
Bill. Yeah. And thank you, David.
What a pleasure.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Rabenhorst.
Yep. Glad it worked. We'll see you later then.
All right. Sounds good. Bye.
Take care.